You take a hard look at the things that have been built according to the excellent new urbanist plans, orthodox plans that were designed by the best practitioners. Now, the implementation is a little coarse. The buildings are too big, they're too long, the increment of investment is too great. And in traveling, you can't help but go back and forth between the newest development and the historic city next door, or the historic neighborhood next door or down the street. And immediately you notice that the increment of development was smaller, that in the bad old days, they were accomplishing the fine-grainedness that new urbanists talk about. And I look at what's been done so far in this kind of re-beginning, as not living up to that standard. Our new places, it's not just the absence of patina. It's not just because they're not streaked and old, and it's not just because the architecture is a little thin and weak. Those are certainly true. It's the size of the pieces. And I don't mean that you can't have big buildings. Big buildings are part of the norm. We should have big buildings and small ones, but you go to some of these places and there are only big buildings. There are only long buildings. There are only block-sized developments. You ask yourself, can't we do what they did in all those historic places in the North End in Boston, or on Beacon Hill, or in San Francisco, or in the historic, you name it, Old Town Alexandria? Can't we do what they did there, and that is achieve extraordinarily high densities and still have the texture and livability and joy that comes from building a lot of small is beautiful projects? There are a lot of obstacles to realizing the goal I just set. There's the increment of finance. The money seems to come in great big loads when it finally does come, and it has to be spent all at once on big projects. The projects seem to be scaled to the increment of the efficient parking structure. Well, we have to have the big parking structure, and then we have to have an even bigger block because we need to dutifully wrap it with the liner buildings with habitable space following the street, and that's all correct, but it results in super block developments, even from new urbanists. And then there's the increment of transaction. That parcel, the redevelopment agency just decided to let go, and that was the size of the parcel, so bingo, that's the size of the transaction, and voila, that's the size of the building. And I question this. I think, gosh, they missed out on the opportunity to create more value by building a little, showing it, and then building the next phase at a higher price, at a higher level of luxury, at a higher level of desirability, because they built some and then added. That kind of intelligent incrementalism isn't creep, isn't excessive humility. It's what the new urbanism was always supposed to be about. So we need to rediscover lots. We need to remember how to build a building on a lot, self-contained, represents a small amount of risk, relatively speaking, and let a lot of people roll the dice a lot of times, and let some of them fail. Nature does it that way. It puts a lot of leaves on each tree just in case a few fall off. It doesn't depend on one big green leaf to do all the work for the tree. Similarly, cities have that texture because we let a lot of buildings, a lot of investors behind them, try a lot of ideas and adjust to one another as they're coming out of the ground. This idea of tailoring what you're doing according to what's gone on around you or just before is the way a jazz musician works in a combo. They don't know what their buddy is going to play, but they listen and they compose on the fly and they adjust what they are about to do in real time based on the context, based on the sonic context. And on old main streets, the person who built the next building was taking into account the things that were going on either side of them or across the street, and they were amending and building local distinctiveness. And these projects that have been built over the last 20 years, while they're spectacular successes, are for the most part lacking that kind of fine adjustment. So I'm hoping that over the next 20, 40 years, we'll have new urbanism that gets that right.